What does cask strength mean?
How do I know how long it was in the barrel?
Who decided to put stuff in barrels?
Hello everybody, I'm Mac McCormick. We're here with Big Whiskey Rebellion, and today's show is everything you always wanted to know about whiskey, but were too afraid to ask. We have some guests today. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Melanie Martin. I love whiskey, and I'm here to try the different whiskeys and see what I like and what I don't.
Awesome.
I'm Daryl Brown. I have a great appreciation for spirits. You can almost call me a professional drinker.
I've seen you mix whiskey with a Slurpee before, so I don't want to hear that.
You gotta try different things, bring out different notes. But yeah, no, I'm just here to expand my education and drink some whiskey.
I'm Chris Weibel. I like different types of alcoholic drinks. Whiskey is one of them, and it's the one that I really concentrate on now, that and Scotch. And I actually think of Scotch as different from whiskey for some reason, because I started as a bourbon drinker.
Technically, whiskey was either originated in Scotland or in Ireland.
Exactly.
They don't know which. So really the bourbon is the secondary.
Scottish genes are calling out to me when I drink Scotch. It's amazing.
And are they skinny jeans or are they? No, I'm kidding.
Skinny jeans. I think they are.
My name is Dawn Roy, and I'm a converted wine drinker to bourbon about 2 years ago, and it's been game on since. And then being introduced to you 6 or 8 months ago, just to expand on the education and to learn more about the vast array of what whiskey can offer.
Do you always drink bourbon?
I always drink bourbon. I will drink like your Japanese whiskeys or your Irish stuff like that, but
Equal opportunity.
I am an equal opportunity sipper.
That's a good way to be.
So
Today's show is kind of like allowing you guys to ask me some questions. It's free form. I want you to actually ask me anything that maybe you've always been curious about.
I've always wondered when I look at a bottle, how do I know, if it doesn't say it on the label somewhere, how long it was in the barrel or how old it is, something like that?
So some of the bottles, they intentionally don't do an age statement. There's a big misconception that whiskey can only be good when it's been aged a certain amount of time. And distilleries are kind of getting away from age statements for several reasons. One, demand has gone up through the roof, and so they can't just sit there and wait until something has a specific age to release it. But other times they've been realizing that sometimes whiskey got overwooded, which that's a real thing. You don't really think about it, but I've had some really expensive bourbons in my life that I was not a big fan of because it was just so tannic and it just wasn't my thing. So and a good example of that is Elijah Craig. So if you think about 10 years ago, the Elijah Craig kind of entry-level product was a 12-year. But we have a barrel head over there that just says Elijah Craig 12. That was a standard for them. And now it just says Elijah Craig small batch. But I've had the chance to side by side the 12-year that was the original all the time age stated product against the new small batch that doesn't have an age statement. And I actually prefer the non-age stated small batch versus the 12-year because to me, the sweet spot for bourbon is more like a 7 or 8 year bourbon. It has all those kind of like high hitting sweet notes that I prefer in my bourbons.
So as far as barreling goes, who decided to put stuff in barrels? Was it just like a transport sort of thing and storage? And then two, as far as like charring the inside of barrels?
So transport and storage was absolutely the first use of them. I mean, it wasn't just whiskey that was barreled back in the day. It was everything, pickles or honey, or they had to put it in something. The charring thing, from what I understand, started in New Orleans because they would use barrels again. And so if they had something in there that maybe wasn't going to mesh very well with the whiskey that they were going to put in it, they would char it to get rid of whatever the flavor of that was there before. And then they put the whiskey in it. And as they transported it down the Mississippi this is literally how the kind of age statements started with bourbon. Because they realized after a journey of a certain number of days or weeks or months or whatever it took, the whiskey tasted different. And as it would sit waiting to be sold, it would also change. And so originally whiskey wasn't aged. And then it was transporting it that they started realizing it was better. And it wasn't until years later that people started saying, well, after 2 or 3 years it has these qualities, or after 5 years it has these qualities. So we have 4 types of liquor here. We have a tequila, a rum, a bourbon, and a single malt scotch. And I have these here to kind of talk about barrels. And we're going to start talking about bourbon first, because bourbons have a law. In the United States, we have a law that says to call it a bourbon, the barrel can only be used 1 time. Because of that, American bourbon barrels are used all over the world. And so we're going to have 2 more products which use bourbon barrels that you get to try. And then we have a scotch that's been aged in not just a ex-bourbon cask, but also a port cask. So this is one of my favorite bourbons that you can buy almost all the time. It's the Old Forester 1910.
Mine
Stuff
too.
is absolutely delicious. It can get you in trouble because it's so smooth.
In a quick way. It's lovely.
It is, isn't it?
It's lovely.
It's smooth and it's not
Sweet.
too spicy. It's a little
Yes.
sweet.
Are you describing Daryl, or are you describing
Very,
the bourbon?
very much.
Yes.
No, but I do really like it because there's like no bite.
While you're remembering those things, like this is something that most people in a whiskey bar would not talk about, but this is actually a really great tequila. El Mayor makes this, and this was one that they hand-selected specific bourbon barrels to age their tequila in, and this was one that was specifically done for the state of Virginia where we live. But this was aged in bourbon for 3 years, so has a lot of the qualities that you're describing, and I want you to taste it so you can see, because if I just tell you this tastes like bourbon, it's kind of goofy, but if you taste it and you see that it tastes like bourbon, then maybe that will translate to people who don't really understand the aging processes of tequila. Because when people start their tequila adventures, they usually drink something Blanco, like a Hornitos or the Patron Blanco. And I've actually had customers, and Daryl works with me, so he could probably attest to this, who will say, oh, I don't like the brown stuff because it's harsher. But that's actually the opposite. When you age a tequila, it actually gets sweeter, richer, more subtle. And in this case, it's a very well-aged tequila. And so I want you guys to give that a taste. And I think you'll catch some of those bourbon notes I was just talking about.
So while we're doing this, since we're jumping spirits, differences in the stills, as well as, and then the aging in the barrels. Because I don't know, do they age tequilas the same way that they do bourbons once they're in a barrel? Like, do they, have like a rick house and then height and whatnot matter?
In some cases, some people actually age in caves. Some people just age it outside in places where it doesn't necessarily rain a lot. It really just depends. The aging happens a lot faster in Mexico, though, because it's so hot down there. And so there's a lot more interaction between the spirit and the wood. Part of the thing about aging in Scotland or aging in the United States is we have winters, and the aging process slows up a lot when it's cold outside. There's not as much interaction, but a really hot environment creates a bigger change in the spirit. You guys see what I'm talking about, though, with the bourbon there?
Yes.
So now we're gonna go to a rum, which is also ex-bourbon. And this is Plantation's 5-year. Can't go wrong with rum. I love rums. Combination of the sugar cane with the ex-bourbon, it creates something very fruity and caramelly, and I love it.
What does cask strength mean?
Cask strength means they have not diluted it. So if you buy an entire barrel of bourbon and you choose to say, I don't want it to be cut, they will give it to you as it is. They'll tell you what the proof is. But most of the time when you buy products, like remember I said that this was 93 proof? So the master distiller makes a decision that at 93 proof, that's the ideal taste for that particular whiskey. So they add distilled water to bring it down to 93 proof from whatever it started out at, 115, 118, sometimes as high as 135. It just depends.
No, to me, it's just velvety on the tongue. There's a softness, a gentleness about this one in particular.
For me, it's a really good cake. Like almost like hint of fruit, vanilla, but not like Christmas fruit cake.
Right.
But like I don't know, like a lemon pound cake almost. I mean, it's not lemon,
Oh, yeah.
but like I get that
Yeah.
sweetness that just kind of fills your mouth. Like you can almost chew through this.
I agree.
Definitely some fruit, maybe banana
Yeah.
with some spice, and it's really, I think velvety is a good word. And
I
it's
agree.
really
I agree. It's
smooth,
just smooth.
really.
It just rolls over your tongue.
really is,
It's
yes.
really nice.
Yes.
I picked that one because I loved that particular distillery's rum. But can you see where the bourbon cask would influence the flavors? Where
Right.
Getting the caramel and
I thought I
getting
could taste it in the beginning, yeah, and then the rum flavor really, but it's so smooth. Wow.
So we're going to take you completely out of that now and show you what happens when you use a different type of barrel. In this particular case, we're using a single malt scotch that was started in ex-bourbon casks and then finished in a port cask. And the reason they do that is because it brings more of a fruited, like stone fruit note to the back end of the whiskey. So very different than what you guys have been having here. Now you are a bourbon drinker, but how nice is that?
It's very.
It's a
And it's surprising, to be honest with you. It's coming as a little bit of a shock.
so
Because I don't tend toward, I don't trend toward this
Scotch.
product. I
Right.
don't.
I had not been much of a Scotch drinker, and a few years ago, my husband's stepfather bought me a bottle for Christmas.
Yes.
And it was Macallan's.
yes.
And it was so good.
Which
And
Macallan was it? Do you know?
I don't remember.
Well, they're all very
I have
different.
some at home.
Well, you should bring it next time.
I know the bottle.
We haven't. Just
I'm sure.
shoot.
text a picture.
Yeah, send me a picture and
it's on
then we
this
can
wall
talk about that one.
somewhere.
I'm
Yeah.
sure it is. Everything's on this wall.
So do you see the
Yes.
barrel influences in all of these?
What's crazy is going from the night, like, so doing a side by side, doing a 1910 versus a Glenmorangie, you can taste more of the bourbon barrel
Yes.
than if you go from like the plantation to the Glen. And,
Oh.
and then you get more of the port finish and like those fruit notes. So
Absolutely.
it's like doing them side, like, try this one after this one. Okay, cool. Now try this one after this one. Then you get, I don't know, it's very different profiles.
Well, it's almost like you need to do a flight so that, like, to toggle on top of what Daryl was saying, almost do a flight of different things so that as you toggle between all these different things, you do get different notes, you do get a different experience than just drinking one.
And that's why I picked these, because you don't say, oh, let me get that tequila with that scotch and that bourbon and that rum. But when you start really teaching yourself about these things and you start trying them against each other, you start to realize that the influences of the barrels are changing the flavor of the things that we drink. And when you think about tequila, the way we usually drink it, it's like, oh, get it over with and chase it with a beer or something. Right. But that's not what tequila is supposed to be. This tequila is beautiful. You're supposed to sip it like you would sip a whiskey and take your time with it. And I think that without the barrel influence for that particular product, it wouldn't be that product.
No. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it.